us a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, Kenny.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hi everybody, and welcome to the City Art Salon and our first artist talk that we're having this afternoon. I'm here with Jennifer Manzella and Eric Van Nielsen, whose beautiful work is hanging on our walls in a show that's called Language of the Artist. And so we're here, they're gonna talk to you in their own respective languages and tell us a little bit about themselves, how they got started, how they've evolved as artists, what some of their creative influences have been, and maybe if there was some major catalytic event in their artistic career. So without further ado, I'll let them speak for themselves. Eric, you want to start off?
Sure.
Okay.
So hi Jen, how are you?
Hi, Eric.
So I think I'm going to ask you the first question. Could you tell us maybe a little bit about where you started your whole artistic journey, like even from a young age? Like what got you started in image making and then eventually printmaking?
Yeah, I think it was drawing dinosaurs in 3rd grade. If you want the truth, that's...
I want nothing but the truth.
That's it. I started drawing at a very young age. My mother was an artist, so it actually was encouraged, and it came pretty naturally.
So it was in the family?
It was in the family, and I never had a lot of fear around drawing. I think that's important to recognize, because there wasn't ever that moment when I was a child when I thought, oh, I need to do things correctly, or that there was any expectation about what I needed to draw. Like, I just loved to draw.
Oh,
Yeah.
So speaking of expectations, you know, most artists, you know, they tend to wrestle with their medium before they sort of land on painting or sculpture, but printmaking, you know, I'm curious, what was the trajectory from drawing dinosaurs to printmaking?
It was, 20 years.
Well, let's go through no.
Yeah.
But was there a moment, whether it was in school or was there an artist that you knew or admired where you just suddenly were grabbed by the printmaking process?
Yeah, it definitely came much later. As a young adult in college, and I was a non-traditional student too, so when I went back to college, I was older than a lot of the students, so I definitely had more of an appreciation for being in school. Mm-hmm. I really loved it, and I started printmaking. Let's see, I took a printmaking class, and I didn't really know what it was. I mean, maybe I had done a linoleum cut in high school, like a lot of people, potato prints, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I really didn't have like a background in printmaking.
Right.
It's just, and maybe that was better. I mean, maybe that was what made it so exciting for me, is I had no background. I was learning everything, fresh. Mm-hmm. And it felt really like exciting and different, and what I really enjoyed about printmaking was that the results could be oftentimes unexpected. Like the medium does its own thing. Yeah. And I liked that. I mean, I always think about printmaking in ceramics, because ceramics is the same sort of phenomenon happens where, you go into the medium with an idea that, or knowing that your imagery is going to be translated through process. Right. And there's unexpected consequences. Right. Which is great,
Yeah, no, that's a great comparison. The press with the kiln. Even someone like you with that experience of ink and knowing your materials, I would imagine up to even now you still kind of have that anticipation for as you're turning out each print, like what you're going to get.
Lots of unknowns.
Yeah.
Lots of unknowns. And how about you? Well, so we can kind of, but before I go farther into my work, let's talk about your origins and how you got started.
We'll skip the biological origins. We'll go to the artistic ones. I think for me, similar to you, it would be definitely dinosaurs were part of the oomph of my early work, as well as Ninja Turtles. Big thing in the late '80s, was Ninja Turtles. So lots of drawings of those, and it was funny. Just like you, it was almost like a magnetism to paper. I mean, my mother tells me stories about picking me up from school, or the daycare after school, and they would just hand her piles of drawings that I had done in Crayola and marker and things, and I had requested different colors of paper and all. I don't remember these things, but she shows me the evidence.
She probably still has those, doesn't she?
She does, yeah. She's a keeper. But yeah, and then people both in the family and outside the family would usually say something like, "Oh, it's because at such a young age, it would be sort of more about." I couldn't draw like Da Vinci, but it was just the level of detail I was putting in the drawings. They were noticing that, window panes had little sparkles on them, or doorknobs and things that other kids wouldn't include. Yeah, and then it just was sort of a steady ramping up in my youth. And then in high school, someone told me about the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art, and I was very much still a representational artist and wanting to be, I think I said this to you at our opening, but I really wanted to be probably John Singer Sargent 2.0. That was like my goal.
Did you grow up in Pennsylvania?
No, not originally. So I was actually born in Princeton, across the river.
Okay.
But then I grew up in Austin, Texas.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think we might have had a conversation about that.
So I'm sort of like an origin mutt.
So I guess that's what I'm trying to understand the PAFA connection. If you had known about PAFA,
So yeah, that came. So when I was 16, I moved back to the East Coast to finish high school in New Hope, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And there was just kind of this funnel of artists. I mean, you had the Bucks County Impressionists. That's a scene up there. New York obviously is a huge influence, but yeah, PAFA was a big pull for a lot of artists who were looking to kind of hone their skills. And, if you weren't going to go to New York, or maybe Chicago, or RISD, PAFA was, certainly kind of one of the big choices. Plus, they had a giant cast of David in the cast, so that helped on the tour. So yeah, and that was the ramp up from amateur young person to wanting to be professional artist.
Yeah, so going to PAFA, being introduced to PAFA, and maybe going there before you attended that institution kind of inspired you to devote yourself to being an artist? Is that?
Yeah, I think seeing the seriousness with which they were taking the education, and thus you would assume the artists were taking their sort of career choice and their work. I remember taking the tour and seeing the cast hall and meeting some of the teachers, and you just got this sense that, it wasn't about kind of trends or anything like that. It was about going deep into the roots of a European artistic tradition.
Yeah.
And that really spoke to me a lot.
Yeah, sure. So. I can imagine the level of craftsmanship and skill that you were kind of experiencing when you were seeing, students at PAFA, probably.
Oh yeah, it was
impressed you quite a bit.
Quite a bit.
Yeah.
So switching gears back to you for a minute.
Okay.
What was a moment where you kind of had, I don't know, if maybe an epiphany moment, or was there kind of maybe just a moment of sort of no return where suddenly, whether it was instructor or work with your own, process already with printmaking where it was just so clear where you wanted to take like your beautiful prints?
Oh geez, that's a hard question to answer. I'd say it's like a series of moments throughout my life. I mean, there were definitely times when I didn't really make a lot of art, I think that's something that's important to acknowledge, is that my art career hasn't been continuous.
Mm-hmm.
Although as a kid, like, I always felt like that was probably what I was gonna do. I wasn't really thinking of other options, to be honest with you.
Right.
But there were moments where, definitely there were times in my life where I just couldn't figure out how to like start an art practice, or where to even begin, because I also didn't go to college right after high school.
Right.
And so having those couple years in between where I worked lots of strange jobs and kind of existed in the real world, and then going back to school and being inspired. I definitely had a mentor in college.
Mm-hmm.
A printmaker. Sam Walker was his name. He's no longer with us anymore, but he really inspired me to be experimental with the process, and that was exciting to me. So in other words, like, this was the late 90s, and I was also working in the Mac lab at school as well as a monitor. So doing that helped me start to incorporate like digital work.
Mm-hmm.
In late 90s. This was really like, it felt very experimental.
That's on the cutting edge back then. Like,
Yeah.
timeline wise.
Yeah, I was not interested in making editions or copies, or I was printing out like cheap inkjets and pasting them and shinkolaying and doing intaglio work over top of them, and
That's really cool.
yeah, it was. So maybe that was the moment where I adopted printmaking as a process where I could translate a lot of random ideas to create like, I like how this kind of spins around to the title of the show, right? A language, right? A vocabulary, like a visual vocabulary, where I didn't necessarily know what I was trying to say,
Mm-hmm.
but what I later experienced when I was applying to grad school, for example, and I had to like kind of review and reflect on my undergraduate work,
Mm-hmm.
was that I was actually making sentences and statements that just took me a few years to unpack.
Right. Which is kind of the best kind of work to make. You always get a sort of squeamish feeling when you talk to artists and they say, well, I had this message to apply into the work, and thus I, chose these mediums and this format. And there's always a feeling of sort of a pat sort of predictability to it.
Yeah.
And I feel like the best work is the work that we even are working to translate ourselves after it's been exorcised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And how about you? So when was the moment, let's say, or was there a specific moment in your career when things really started to make sense?
Oh, that is a tough question, but I do know the answer. Well, I, like you, I had fits and starts with my career. It feels weird to call it that.
Yeah, I know.
But PAFA, as we all know, is very oriented towards representational artwork,
Mm-hmm.
and thankfully so, I have to say. But I felt as if that was a foundation, a starting point, rather than an end in of itself.
Mm-hmm.
But I was lost for a long time as to where it was that I was going to be going.
Mm.
And then because, like you, I was taking jobs in the real world and yeah, maybe got a little resentful of some of those realities. I think I just sort of said, I'm not going to paint for a while and accept the reality of money and hard work,
Yeah,
providing
yeah.
for myself. And then it's sort of twofold. I got really terribly sick in a very unpredictable way in 2014. And I was hospitalized, and all of sort of the life foundation that I had built for myself got yanked out from under me.
Wow.
I mean, I went from living with somebody in a wonderful apartment in Chicago to living like with my father on the couch, trying to recover after getting out of the hospital, and basically rebuilding my life piece by piece. And it was such a visceral, subconscious thing that was so undeniable. It just said, you have to paint. You have to paint.
Interesting, yeah.
And what it was, and even to me it was interesting, because I was like, thought I was done, and you know, was mad that the world is expensive, and it was like as if I had to sort of, I don't mean to diminish what I'd gone through, but it was as if I had to sort of depict what I had gone through in painting form, but abstractly. And I had never painted abstractly before.
Okay.
Maybe on the computer when I was a kid, I probably did some doodles.
Yeah,
That's
right,
about
right,
it.
right, yeah.
And it really took me by surprise. I mean, I said this at our opening to somebody. I used to secretly look in the art history book at some of the abstract artists and kind of wish that I could like duck down those alleys, in some secret corner of my room where I painted, and then get back to nice, well-rendered faces or landscapes or whatever.
Interesting.
And then it was as if a dam broke after I'd been really sick and got out of the hospital. And the first real painting I did, I sent it off to a good friend of mine who's a very talented abstract artist. And all she wrote back was, "Don't stop."
Wow.
So, I mean, that's the first half of the story.
And this was after your undergrad studies, right?
Yes, this is after undergrad. This is well after, actually. But I had stopped painting.
Yeah,
Because
right.
I had grown disgruntled, I guess, or cynical. I really saw myself as just getting into commercial art, utilizing my gifts really just for, commercial works that I could put food on the table and whatever else. We've all been down those roads, but yeah, I mean, it really took me by surprise. And then the second part of that sort of little mini journey is that Princeton that same year had a show at their museum called From Rothko to Richter.
Oh yeah, we've had like a brief conversation about Gerhard Richter before.
We did, yeah. And I was really just. A friend called me up. They said, "Do you want to go to the show? I heard you're painting I had just rented my very first studio."
Yeah.
They were like, "Do you want to come and look at the show? You might find it inspirational." And I thought, well, yeah, I could use a break. And
Sure.
drove over to Princeton, and I could not have been more blown away.
Right.
And specifically, kind of leading us into one of the other things, talking points, but Helen Frankenthaler had this painting called Belfry, and it was about that size. It was about 5 feet by 5 feet, maybe a little bigger, and it was I almost cried.
Wow.
When I saw her painting.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell you why. I couldn't say, oh well, the cerulean that she's using beneath that grayish green, moves you in just this way. It was indescribable.
Yeah.
And I went back to, and there was also a Joan Mitchell painting there, which was stunning, and there was, of course, a beautiful Gerhard Richter painting.
Yeah.
And I was overwhelmed. And suddenly it was like I was learning a language.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean that really is the truth of it. And I remember just kind of racing home, back to the studio, and fumbling my way with all of that information.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So were any of those particular artists like a starting point for you? Like,
Oh, definitely. I mean,
I mean, in other words, like, was there one specific artist who you were sort of modeling your work after, or?
I never wanted to study the paintings themselves for the composition and the placement of strokes and things like that. That was actually specifically something I wanted to avoid. And yet at the show, I was literally writing down on my hand what Helen Frankenthaler's process was for staining canvas.
Oh,
So it was as if I wanted all of the technique, but I wanted to still, even at such an early stage, find my own voice through those methods.
yeah,
But Helen Frankenthaler would be the short answer to that question. I mean,
yeah,
her work,
yeah,
it was so moving, and also I just never seen or felt anything like that before in front of a painting. And then, I'm somebody who went to galleries and museums and things.
yeah,
And her process just really kind of enthralled me for a while. So I'd say for about 2 years I was really looking at her a lot
Yeah.
and reading about her and understanding what her approach was. And that includes also her woodcuts, by the way.
yeah. I was just thinking she's a printmaker as well, right? Yeah,
Her woodcuts I think are absolutely gorgeous.
yeah, I agreed.
So yeah, that would probably be the starting point. And then from there, we can talk about this a little later, but Joan Mitchell would be the kind of the ramp up artist that I started looking to.
Yeah,
There was more of a, I don't want to say conservative, but I'm struggling for what other word to use. I mean, she was just more disciplined with a smaller set of rules, I guess, about how she worked. And she was less experimental with techniques, maybe. It was all pretty much primed canvas and her going at it.
yeah,
But there was something about it that seemed to be elevated to another place that I wanted to get to, so, yeah.
I mean, it's good in a way, like, to have the constraint of materials, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, just to be okay with, this is what I'm starting with. Canvas, pigment, color, paint, like, that's all I'm working with, and to work within those constraints, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
there's definitely, you can have a creative sort of push when you limit the amount of decisions that you have to make.
It does, yeah. What do they call it? The freedom of the limitations. Yeah.
So I guess I'd ask you this question, looking at your paintings, do you feel like, so when you approach your palette, for example, like color,
Yeah.
do you have those limitations, or do you just sort of like follow your intuition on color? Like, do you tell yourself you're going to approach color in a certain way?
That's a great question. Kenny asked me this question the day of the opening, and I'll say the same thing now that I said to Kenny. I will be driving to the studio, and I'll say, I'm seeing blue and black, and maybe like a very light muted gray, and I'm gonna set that up. I mix my paints on glass window panes. So I would say to myself, I'm gonna set that up on the glass, start mixing, and go to town. And then this is almost every time I paint. I will get to the studio, and there is I don't quite want to say it's a voice, but it basically is a voice, and it'll just say, nope, that's not what you're doing.
Yeah.
I'll walk in the
Interesting.
door,
Okay.
I'll lock the door, I'll put on the music if I'm listening to music, and it'll be like, nope, you gotta leave that in the car. You had fun imagining what you aren't gonna paint, and now you have to trust your intuition.
Huh, okay.
Every time.
So there's, I guess, a bit of, so the spark comes from observation, but once you get into the studio, you sort of let something else take over.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's 100%. It's like if I were to go to a show, like let's say I went to, your solo show, and
Yeah.
you have that piece around the corner with the blue and the green,
Yeah.
those are like really deep ones, and I'd probably say something to the point of, there's something so lush about these colors, I'm going to use these,
Yeah.
and I'll tell myself and my conscious mind, you're going to use these. I'll even know where the tubes of paint are,
Yeah.
and I'll pull them out, and then it's as if there's like a magnet that pulls my hand back to the drawer and says no. And then I have to give in to intuition.
Got it.
And it's almost to the point of frustration, because you want to feel like you have control in the sense of, well, I decided I wanted to paint, that green and blue color that Jen used in her print. But I think what it is, if I had to guess, is that there's something internal happening. That's some sort of wellspring, and you're sort of denying it if you're only living in your conscious sort of control ego mind. I don't want to get too zen, but yeah, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Which leads me to a question for you.
Okay.
When I was looking at your work after you hung it at the beginning of the month, I feel like it's an obvious thing to say. You might be deliberately creating.
Or kind of based on a river trip I did a couple years ago. And it was being on the river, and it was being in this moment where I was sort of discovering a different angle of Philadelphia. I moved back to Philly, and I was discovering like a different way of looking at the city. And for me, I took a lot of photographs, and then later on I sort of go through the photographs and decide what I think, what sort of parts of the photographs I want to pull and reconstruct through printmaking.
Right.
And sure, it definitely has something to do with structures and buildings and like you said, the natural landscape that's kind of intertwined with this urban landscape. But I think that's just because that's what I have a tendency to notice.
Right.
It's what I'm noticing, and it's what I'm attracted to. So that just automatically becomes the subject matter,
Yeah.
And then like the empty lots were a series that I did. So they're those tiny little etchings that are part of the show. That was a series. I moved back to Philadelphia in 2016, and I just started photographing these small landscapes, what I call kind of these tiny landscapes in between buildings, and these kind of lush sort of green spaces within the city, And I was really, they felt very intimate and kind of precious in a way, as you're just, and once again, it's kind of based on me moving through the city and just what I'm noticing. I mean, it just happened naturally. I didn't set out to like, oh, I'm going to all of a sudden start photographing these. It happened naturally, and then it became interesting all of a sudden. Then it almost became like a scavenger hunt, like when I would see them, I'd get really excited, and I'd photograph them in a specific way.
Right.
And the series of etchings came about because I had actually seen a Rembrandt show in 2006 at the Georgia Museum of Art, and I'll never forget walking through that gallery and seeing these tiny copper etchings of the Dutch landscape.
Oh, wow.
And there was something so like, beautiful about the size, the intimacy of these landscapes. Of course, like I could never capture the way that Rembrandt sort of approaches line and texture in the same way, but like there was something so maybe like you with the Helen Frankenthaler and paintings, and the Gerhard Richter paintings and the Rothkos. There was that moment where I just thought, wow, this is really amazing. Like there's something that spoke to me about that. And I didn't, at that time, that was long before it was, before I even started photographing these parts of the city. It really wasn't until I was offered a show at Arcadia University, where I teach,
Right.
where I decided that this was going to be the subject.
I see. So yeah, so yeah, in a similar way, it was just something you were simply drawn to. It was not
Yeah.
premeditated.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I didn't know what I was gonna do with those photographs.
Mm-hmm.
And I had all this copper that somebody had given me, and I was teaching copper etching at Arcadia, and I
Right.
thought, wow, this would be good exercise to, first off, learn how to better etch copper, because I had been, all the intaglio work I had done before that had been in zinc. I had worked in a different material.
Right.
So I was learning a new material,
Mm-hmm.
learning a new technique, and then, oh wait, I've been photographing these tiny landscapes in the city for almost 2 years. This
Oh,
is
wow.
perfect, you know, like,
Yeah.
and then I thought about the size, and that made me consider that Rembrandt show I had seen many years ago, and I thought, I'll do them small. I've never worked small. I've never worked, you know, on in any capacity, drawing or anything, you know, unless it was in a sketchbook. I've never worked in a format of like 2.5 inches by, you know, 3 inches. I mean, that was a really different approach for me.
And that's something I wanted to ask you about. Having had a chance to look at these a number of times, actually, both before the show and then during the show, there is a sensitivity to the values that you have printed on these small little landscapes that I think is so requires a kind of subtle eye that is really kind of remarkable in the sense of it's a delicacy to the point of fragility that the composition would be lost. Let's say that you had etched for 15 more seconds in the bath or something like that. And so I'm curious if, maybe this is a leading question, whether once you were in the process, in the studio, working with the acid bath, whether you were thinking about these landscapes in your mind as you were choosing how the methodology of your process.
Yeah, I actually was using photographs as a source material, so like that, and I would adjust the contrast in the images, but then I would, after I would get that image transferred onto the plate, I would let go of it a little bit, in terms of like texture and tonality, but I still would reference the photograph every now and then as a guide. So it wasn't totally improvisational, if that's sort of where the question that you're...
I think so. I think it's a compliment disguised as a question.
Okay.
Because when I look at these prints right here on the wall,
Yeah.
there's something about them where, again, the values, especially if you're familiar with that Philadelphia urban decay that we've all seen in different parts of the city, there's something about them where I just don't know if they would succeed with someone who didn't have such a sort of a skilled hand in the studio with intaglio printmaking. So in other words, I, as an artist, as somebody who has both succeeded creatively and failed miserably, I just can't help but wonder if that's something like in your fingertips, where you're kind of feeling that landscape a little bit as you're moving. I mean, it's different in a print studio than with paint.
Yeah. You're glazing a, something you've thrown on the wheel. When you start that process of painting on the glazes, you have a reference, the little sample that basically shows you what that glaze will look like once it's fired.
Yeah.
But once you start applying those glazes,
Yeah.
and maybe mixing them into each other, you're deviating from that sample, just like I'm deviating from the photograph, you
Right,
know, like
right.
there's something different that's gonna happen that I can't predict. And I think for me, that's where the process of printmaking, once again, is altering it to be something new, to be something unexpected.
Right, so maybe it is that tension between the unpredictability and the craftsmanship in etching.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I do love the process, you know, I do love manipulating the metal plates or carving into wood and then inking up that block. There is like, I mean, that's maybe the craftsman in me, like like somebody who might be attached to metalworking, foundry work, or maybe woodworking. You know, there's something really, I love mastering materials, you know, learning how to control them in a way, you know, like, and maybe, you know, I mean, I think about this a lot, and maybe this is leading into your paintings as well, because for me, my work is very controlled in a lot of ways, and there's something that, you know, I also desire to be back in that place where I was an undergrad, or even in grad school, where I lose control a little bit, right? And maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because I feel like you probably have a different way of working maybe. Do you ever feel like, I mean, like you were saying with color, you kind of let intuition guide, but is it that way with your mark making as well when you approach the canvas?
It is, and yeah, that's a great, you know, when Kenny told me that he wanted us to show together, I actually just immediately thought it's kind of a perfect odd couple pairing.
Yeah, it really is.
Because of that control versus chaos.
But it's not chaos, right?
It's for some it's perceived chaos, and then you want to help them understand a little bit. But
yeah,
no, it's a great question. It's the same answer really as it was about color. You know, maybe this is a good time to mention, you know, what I think of when I'm working is, again, it's like working with constraints, letting the constraints help you create something you wouldn't have done otherwise. So I'm also in awe of music in all of its forms, all of its genres. I love classical, jazz, punk rock, you know, avant-garde, noise music.
yeah,
And one of the things that I always was envious of, especially before seeing that show, Rothko to Richter, was music's ability to move people.
yeah,
In a way that it was almost like it had a monopoly on that.
yeah,
This like wellspring of emotion in all of us.
yeah,
You know,
sure.
so whether you're sitting at the Kimmel Center listening to Beethoven's Seventh, or you're like going to see, I don't know, the Misfits or something, like, and you're really into it. And so when I think about composition, it's not premeditated in the sense of, this is how I'm going to balance this, and this is where I'm going to place this. It's almost as if the action itself of painting and knowing intuitively what color and brush application, I'm working with, it's as if I'm creating an imprint of the moment with color and texture and solvents and oils and I think that's, yeah, it's almost as if I don't want people to perceive the paintings as though it's a static image with particular symbolic representation of, you know, this object sort of looks like this, or I deliberately put this black apart from this red in this certain way. All of those things happen in real time.
Sure, you're making choices as the paint's in front of you.
Absolutely.
And, right. But do you ever, and I'll ask you this question, because I'm curious about this, do you ever go back into your paintings and build back on top of them?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And it's again, it's unpredictable. Some paintings, I was inexplicably in the groove, shall we say, and I know where I am the whole way through,
Yeah.
and I I should quit today and stop, and it's all a charade, and then I'll put it away and I'll come back to it, and then all of a sudden I see the road forward.
Yeah.
And there's no predictability for me, other than maybe how I'm feeling in that period of time. Which road I'm going to be going down, or maybe sort of more gray area roads in between. But yeah, some, like this painting, for instance, was one sitting, and I knew where I was the whole time.
Yeah.
And I had no way of, like, if we had known each other in that time, and I had said, oh yeah, I'm going to go and paint, I could not have said to you, oh yeah, I'm going to finish a painting tonight. It was as if, it really kind of felt like I had been given a gift. And then I remember the next time I sat down to paint, you know, you would sit there and you think, yeah, it's going to happen again. You kind of like, wait for that lightning.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you realize it's like a cloud that was like beautifully illuminated at sunset, and you're like, I'm gonna. Gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Let's take a minute.
Yeah.
Sure.
Hold on.
Is this intermission?
Well, we can probably, let me pause everything here.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
You got me. I was like, oh.
Yeah, we're probably done. And I really appreciate you guys doing what you were doing. 'Cause
Sure.
That was awesome.
It was really good, yeah.
It was really good. Again, like I said, it's my first time attempting this.
Sure.
And I'm just going to look at it and see where I could have done better. But I didn't see anybody log on.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
So what we'll get is a copy of it,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll be able to send it to you or show it to you.
Can you edit it?
I was gonna say maybe there can. Well, I don't want to. I don't want to add work to what you're doing.
What?
I was gonna say you could actually go in and make some edits if they're.
Yeah, maybe.
We didn't give you a lot of pauses though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was very few breaths.
I
Yeah.
know, but that was great. I stopped because batteries don't last long in these things.
Oh,
okay.
yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
that was the.
So we reached the battery life.
We've reached the battery life of
Okay.
this.
Okay.
But what I'm going to do is, when I get the battery back, when I put batteries in here, we're going to kind of like
Wrap it up.
wrap it up.
Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds great.
Yeah, we had to stretch and not feel self-conscious. It's great.
Yeah. Hey, how long does it take you to make a painting?
I love how relaxed we are now.
I know.
This one took me just shy of 3 hours.
That was the one you did in one sitting. Yeah. Great.
That one took me, I think the blackish one.
Yeah.
That took like 4 sittings, probably cumulatively like 8 hours. This was like pulling teeth.
Yeah.
And it's funny, like right before I finished it, I was like, that's kind of what I was thinking of when I was like, I'm a faker. I don't know what I'm doing. It was missing a few brush strokes, and I was like, I just totally lost my way.
Yeah.
I think that was 3. I think that one was 3 sittings. I don't remember how long they were. This was 3 sittings, and this was 2. Yeah. This one and this one were painted here, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 were painted in my old studio.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. So when you say like 2, 3, 4 settings, is that like a full day in the studio for you?
Yeah.